Ever thought about what happens when two massive companies, like from totally different backgrounds, decide they want the same thing? An entire continent, basically.
It's a fascinating setup, isn't it?
Yeah. Picture the early 2000s. You've got MTN down in Johannesburg looking at Africa and thinking, wow, opportunity.
Big opportunity.
And then across the water in Paris, you have Orange. Same idea, basically. Africa's the next big thing.
And they weren't quiet about it. By 2020, Orange's CEO, Stefan Richard back then, was really talking up Africa's immense potential.
Didn't they even move their Africa HQ to Casablanca?
Yeah.
Like symbolically planting a flag?
They did a clear signal. We're serious about this. But what's really interesting, as he said, is how different they were.
Totally.
Both saw the prize Africa's booming telecom market. But
Yeah.
MTN, well, they were the African success story expanding outwards. Orange was the European giant, France Telecom's mobile arm, using its existing global clout and, frankly, historical French connections.
So it's like this massive game of chess or maybe Risk playing out across Africa. Anglophone ambition versus Francophone strategy.
That's a great way to put it. Different DNAs, different starting points, different networks.
Okay, so in this deep dive, we're going to unpack that. Look at the big moments, the strategies, maybe even the cultural clashes that shaped this whole rivalry.
And figure out what we can learn from how these two giants went about trying to connect Africa. Because the landscape they entered, remember, was transforming.
Right, markets opening up, mobile tech just about to
It
explode.
was a real gold rush moment, you know. You had the vision, the cash.
So let's go back. Johannesburg, 2000, MTN headquarters. You can almost feel the buzz, maybe some tension.
Definitely, they're looking at the map.
And apparently, Nigeria is just blinking red, like unavoidable. There's this quote from an exec, something like, Nigeria's waiting, Africa's waiting, we have to move now. Real urgency there.
That captures their early spirit perfectly. It wasn't just about one country. It was Pan-African from the start. This idea of being everywhere you go.
Yeah, that was their slogan, right?
And it wasn't just talk. They went hard after licenses, country by country, aggressive acquisition.
Which brings us back to Nigeria winning that GSM option in 2001. I mean, GSM, the 2G standard then, that must have felt huge.
Oh, absolutely massive. A cornerstone victory. They launched just months later, August 2001.
And the growth was just insane. Hundreds of thousands of subscribers, like immediately.
It was explosive. And it wasn't just luck. They really focused on the local market, didn't they?
Yeah, the sources mention aggressive marketing, using English and local pidgin, building a proper local management team. They made it feel like their brand.
Exactly. That local connection, that branding as Nigerian essentially, was critical for that early trust and massive uptake. It shows their strategy. Hit the big Anglophone markets hard and fast, even if it looked risky.
Okay, same time frame, 2000, but switch scenes. Paris, France Telecom's Orange HQ, probably a different atmosphere.
Likely, yeah. More measured, perhaps. Stefan Richard's vision was about building this digital continent. A bit more grand strategy, maybe.
And that decision to rebrand everything under Orange, that feels significant. Not just France Telecom mobile here, mobilist there, just Orange everywhere.
It was a power move. Creating a single, strong, global brand. Instant recognition, a sense of scale and stability. It wasn't just a cosmetic change. It offered real strategic advantages.
What kind of advantages?
Well, think about marketing, partnerships, even recruitment. A unified brand simplifies everything and projects strength. And their initial focus, it was clearly on the Francophone countries.
Leveraging those existing ties.
Precisely. Getting stakes early on in places like Côte d'Ivoire, Cameroon, Egypt via or ASCOM, building from a base where they already had, let's say, a cultural foothold. A more controlled expansion compared to MTN's blitz.
It's interesting that France Telecom, even looking back 20 years later, called it a specific strategic choice to go into Africa. It wasn't an afterthought.
No, it's fundamental. Setting up those regional HQs in Abidjan and Nairobi also shows they were thinking long-term, needing that local multilingual expertise on the ground.
So you had MTN building this grassroots African brand almost from scratch in each market.
Versus Orange, arriving with global clout and, in many places, those colonial-era connections, especially in Francophone Africa. That initial phase was all about getting on the board, setting up for the bigger fight for subscribers.
And highlighting that key difference again, MTN going for rapid share in big, untapped Anglophone markets.
While Orange used its Francophone links for a, maybe, safer initial expansion. Two very different starting games.
Okay, Act 2. Let's zoom into West Africa. This is where the initial battle lines were really drawn, wasn't it? Nigeria for MTN, Ivory Coast for Orange.
Absolutely. These two countries perfectly illustrate how those early advantages played out. Lagos, 2004, you have to imagine the energy.
Yeah.
And MTN's green logo is just everywhere.
They owned it, right? Even with rivals like Globacom and Econet popping up, MTN was dominant early on.
There were that 250,000 subscribers just a year after launch. That's phenomenal growth.
And using Pigeon in ads, that shows real local understanding. It felt like Orange wasn't even really in Nigeria at that point.
And that's crucial. Orange's absence gave MTN free rein in Africa's biggest market. A massive head start they arguably never lost there. Nigeria became MTN's fortress.
But then, hop over to Abidjan, Ivory Coast, maybe 2005. Totally different picture. French language, Orange branding is strong, especially with the elite.
Exactly. Orange Côte d'Ivoire played that familiarity card perfectly. The French connection, the early 3G rollout, sponsoring local events in French, it cemented them as the premium choice.
MTN was there, sure, through buying Libertas, but they were the challenger.
Definitely playing catch-up, needing French-speaking managers, competing more on price. Orange just had that home field advantage, you know?
There's that quote from the Orange exec about French management building trust. It sounds like they really leaned into that cultural link.
They absolutely did. It wasn't just about the network. It was about cultural resonance. MTN had to build that trust from the ground up, market by market.
So Nigeria and Ivory Coast, like miniature versions of the whole continent-wide tension. MTN leads in Anglophone territory. Orange dominates the Francophone zone.
But neither was just going to stick to their zones. The ambition was bigger.
Which takes us to Act 3, the central stage. Cameroon, especially. A bilingual country. This is where they'd really go head-to-head, right? No clear linguistic home advantage for either.
Cameroon is fascinating for exactly that reason, a true duel. MTN jumped in early 2000, buying Camtel's mobile unit.
And that slogan, MTN, Cameroon for the people, by the people, very grassroots.
Very MTN. They started tiny, just 4,500 subs, but hit profitability in 3 years.
Yeah.
That shows their ability to adapt and grow quickly, focusing on rural areas, local promotions. They even sponsored the cricket team.
Meanwhile, Orange got the second license, also launched in 2000. Their approach sounds different, though, more top-down.
It seems so. Their CTO is talking about partnerships with the government, planning rapid 3G upgrades. Leveraging state connections and tech superiority was more their angle.
So, a real clash of styles in Cameroon. Orange with government ties and French tech know-how versus MTN pushing its African roots and aiming for broader coverage.
And both pouring in billions. They knew Cameroon was strategically vital.
But it wasn't smooth sailing, was it? There were whispers about regulations, maybe favoring the French.
There were definitely allegations. MTN was reportedly lobbying hard for licenses, while there were suggestions regulators leaned towards Orange. It highlights a huge challenge in Africa. Navigating these complex, sometimes politically charged regulatory environments, that's a critical skill.
Definitely a key takeaway there. Then we shift to Egypt. Totally a different story again.
Completely different. Orange had a massive legacy there through Mobinil, which started way back in '98 via Orascom.
So by the time it officially became Orange Egypt in 2017, they were deeply entrenched.
Absolutely. Mobinil was dominant. It demonstrates how getting in early and building strong local roots, like Orascom did, can create a near unbeatable position. MTN just couldn't get a foothold.
They tried to buy some of Orascom's other African assets, didn't they? But failed.
They did. It just shows how hard it is to challenge an incumbent with that kind of history. North Africa, especially Egypt, was firmly Orange territory.
So language, history, strategy, it all carved up the map differently across the continent.
Which perfectly sets up the next phase, the technology race, Act 4, the battle for 4G LTE.
Right. The 2010s hit, and it's not just about calls and texts anymore. It's about data, speed, the whole digital experience. 4G is the new prize.
Faster speeds, richer services, more revenue from data. It was the next big frontier.
And MTN seems to have gone big in Nigeria again. December 2015, 4G launch, big press conference, CEO talking about empowering Nigerians.
They wanted to be seen as the tech leader there, absolutely. Protecting their crown jewel market. They invested hundreds of millions in spectrum, those crucial radio waves and towers, to get 4G out quickly in major cities.
Meanwhile, Orange had its own 4G plan for Francophone Africa. Stefan Richard aiming for 4G across most operations by 2018.
A systematic rollout. And in Côte d'Ivoire, they were launching around 2015 too, investing in fiber, pushing 4G in Abidjan.
And their marketing, again, linking 4G to the Francophonie, talking about rivaling European speeds. Consistent branding.
Very consistent. mirroring their earlier strategy.
Yeah.
Use tech leadership to reinforce their position in key Francophone hubs.
And back to Cameroon, the familiar battleground. Orange gets 4G there first in the big cities. 2018, bragging rights.
For a moment. But MTN Cameroon fired back, pushing 4G aggressively into smaller towns, making sure to cover Anglophone regions too. That constant one-upmanship.
It really drove 4G adoption across the country, didn't it? That competition benefited everyone.
Without a doubt, Orange's urban focus spurred MTN to go wider, faster. Consumers won.
And it didn't stop at 4G. We see 4.5G from MTN in Abidjan, 4.75G from Orange in Cameroon. Just this relentless tech arms race.
Huge investments in fiber tower spectrum everywhere. And it wasn't just network tech. They started copying each other's successful ideas too. Orange Money versus MTN Momo, fintech acquisitions.
So the lesson there is you can't stand still.
Absolutely not. In these fast-moving African markets, constant innovation, adopting new tech, new services, it's essential just to keep up, let alone lead.
But tech is only half the story. Act 5, the messy stuff. Regulatory battles, cultural clashes.
Yeah, non-technical hurdles. And MTN hit a huge one in Nigeria 2015, that massive fine.
$5.2 billion for not disconnecting unregistered SIMs. The sources call it a seismic shock. You can see why.
It absolutely rocked MTN. A huge financial hit, a massive regulatory slapdown. Nigerian regulators accused them of willful noncompliance. It forced a major rethink.
Imagine those boardroom meetings. That fine was what? A significant chunk of the Nigerian government's budget at the time? It must have been terrifying.
Utterly. Even though it was eventually negotiated down to around $1.7 billion, the lesson was brutal. You cannot ignore local regulations and political realities, especially in your biggest market.
And there was all that speculation, too, wasn't there, about Nigerian national pride, fallen oil prices maybe playing a role, adds a whole geopolitical layer.
It does. It's a stark reminder that being big doesn't make you invulnerable. You need strong government relations, impeccable compliance, a critical lesson.
Orange seemed to face different kinds of hurdles in Francophone Africa. Less about massive fines, more about navigating local labor laws, government shareholdings.
Exactly. Like the Cameroonian government having a 20% stake in Orange Cameroon. That creates a different dynamic. More need for collaboration, maybe navigating political requests for local hires, things like that.
So a different approach to managing risk. Orange working within the system, leveraging state support maybe, while MTN sometimes seemed more confrontational.
It often appeared that way, reflecting their different origins and relationships in those markets.
And the cultural stuff is fascinating too. MTN tapping into Nollywood, Afrobeats festivals, really connecting with Anglophone youth culture.
While Orange focused heavily on soccer sponsoring Francophone leagues, major AFCON events. Remember Ivory Coast hosting AFCON 2023? That was a huge platform for Orange.
Tailoring their brand building to specific cultural contexts. Smart.
Essential for building that emotional connection and loyalty.
Even mobile money played out differently. Nigeria's initial rules forced MTN into partnerships because telcos couldn't be banks directly.
Whereas Orange, in many Francophone countries, could often launch more directly, sometimes partnering with banks but with fewer restrictions. It shows how different legal frameworks may be rooted in French versus English legal traditions shaped even their fintech plays.
Wow. Okay, that brings us pretty much up to date. Act 6, the 5G dawn. The next big leap.
The next battlegrounds.
MTN seems keen to lead again, launching 5G in Nigeria September 2022. Big claims about revolutionizing things, being first in Anglophone markets.
It was a definite statement of intent, reasserting tech leadership in their core market, getting ahead of the curve.
Orange's 5G plans sound maybe a bit more paced, targeting most African operations by end of 2024, starting with Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire.
And using that Africa Cup of Nations and Ivory Coast as a big 5G showcase. It feels like a strategic market-by-market rollout, ensuring quality. Classic Orange, perhaps.
But there's pressure, right? Back in Johannesburg, MTN's group CEO is talking about needing to scale 5G fast, keeping rivals like Vodacom and Airtel at bay.
The competition never stops. And interestingly, those old Anglophone-Francophone lines might be blurring a little with 5G. Orange launched in Botswana, which is Anglophone.
And MTN is looking to expand 5G further in Nigeria, so maybe the old divides aren't as rigid anymore.
It certainly suggests that dynamics are evolving. Both players might be looking beyond their traditional strongholds for future growth in the 5G era.
So wrapping this all up, it's clear MTN and Orange are the undisputed telecom titans of Africa today. Their rivalry literally built networks across the continent.
Absolutely. And that Anglophone-Francophone split we've talked about so much, it shaped everything, didn't it? Both an advantage and a challenge depending on where they were operating. But the competition itself, that's what drove so much investment and innovation.
It really underscores how critical leadership decisions are. People like Stefan Richard at Orange, the various CEOs at MTN, their choices echoed across millions of lives.
And ultimately, that competition, that constant push, has accelerated everything. Broadband access, fintech services like mobile money.
Things that are genuinely transforming lives and economies. Looking ahead, it won't stand still, will it? New players, Airtel, Vodacom expanding, maybe satellite companies. Regulations will keep changing.
The landscape will continue to shift. But the legacy of this huge MTN-Orange rivalry, this story of clashing ambitions and strategies, that's going to resonate for a long time.
Because in the end, this battle wasn't just about market share. It was about two different blueprints for connecting Africa. And you could argue the real winners are the millions of people across the continent now plugged into the digital world.
Which leads to a final thought for you, the listener. How has this intense competition between MTN and Orange actually affected you, your connectivity, the digital tools you use? And looking forward, what do you think the next big wave of telecom innovation in Africa will be?
And just a quick disclaimer. While we've dug deep, we can't know every single detail of what happened in those boardrooms or negotiations. Our deep dive is based on news reports, company statements, and public records available to us.
It's a story still unfolding, really. Definitely worth keeping an eye on how these giants continue to shape Africa's digital future.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.